everybody, it's Heather Nichols, and today I have a card to share with you that's full of color and everything rainbows. I'm creating the rainbows with the Easy Strips 1/2 inch die along with sticky sheets. I'll also be using the Rainbows All Around stamp. The sentiments on my project are from the Mini Strips Rainbow stamp, and I'll be cutting those sentiments out with the Mini Strips Flags die. I'm using the A2 thin frame cutting plate die as well as the Stitched Frame Stacklets 1 die collection. I'm doing embossing, and so I have my Versamark ink pad, my powder tool, and also white embossing powder. For adhesives, I'm using foam sticky strips and also multi-medium matte. And then finally for an embellishment, I'm using rainbow enamel dots. I gathered together cardstock colors to use as the rainbow stripes on my card. I have fruit punch, sweet potato, pineapple, avocado, and blue raspberry. I used the Easy Strips 1/2 inch die to cut strips from all of the colors using my die cut machine. I'm taking those strips and I'm going to create a striped background with them. And so I need a base to adhere the strips to. I've got a piece of printer paper, or like typing paper would work well, and I'm covering that piece of paper with a sticky sheet. The sticky sheets are a double-sided adhesive. I've got the paper cut down to an A2 size, the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, which is the size of the sticky sheet. And as you can see, I peel back part of the backing, line it up with the corner of the paper, and then I will peel the backing off as I'm adhering that to the printer paper piece. Now I'm going to peel off the paper on the front part here, and I'm just going to expose it partially, and then I'll start applying the strips of cardstock into a rainbow striped pattern. I'm going to do a diagonal stripe pattern, so I'm starting with the blue raspberry, and then I'll start building my rainbow design across this whole sheet of paper. As I'm laying the strips down, I'm making sure to snug these pieces right up close next to each other so there's not a gap between the strips. Once that whole sheet is covered, I give it a good press to make sure everything is adhered down to the adhesive really well. And then I'll use a pair of scissors just to trim all of those strips even with the piece of paper that I used as the base. Next, I'm going to stamp that background with the Rainbows All Around stamp. I'm setting this up in my MISTI, and I'll just set that in there and close the lid of my MISTI to pick up the stamp on the lid. I'll set that striped background into my MISTI. I have adhesive on the grid paper to hold that background in place. And then because I'll be embossing, I'm going to condition the panel using the anti-static powder tool so that the embossing powder stays where I want it to on the panel. I'm inking up the stamp with Versamark ink, and then I'll close the lid of the MISTI to stamp the Rainbows All Around pattern onto the striped background. Next, I'll pour the white embossing powder over the stamped image, and it will stick to that Versamark ink. I'll pour off the extra and put that back in the container to use for later, and then I'll use my heat tool to melt the powder on the design until it is nice and shiny. I also am embossing the sentiments. These are from the Mini Strips Rainbow stamp. First, I'm taking a piece of Oreo cardstock and I'm adding that into my MISTI and conditioning it with my anti-static powder tool. I'll lay the stamp where I want it to go on my cardstock and then close the lid of the MISTI to pick that stamp up, ink it up with Versamark ink, and stamp that onto the Oreo cardstock. Again, I'll add white embossing powder to the stamped design and then use my heat tool to melt the embossing powder until it is nice and shiny. I'll cut out all of the Mini Strips sentiments with one pass through my die cut machine with the Mini Strips Flags die. I'll line this up with the alignment guides both on the die and on the stamp design, and then I'll tape that in place with the removable Scotch tape and send that right through my die cut machine. Next, I'm taking my rainbow striped background design and I'm cutting a frame out of it using the Stitched Frame Stacklets 1 die collection. I'm cutting the frame from the striped background, but then I'm also cutting 2 additional frames from pieces of toffee cardstock so that I can raise the frame up just a little bit on the background. Okay, let's put this card together. I have a toffee card base. This is the A2 size, and I'm going to start by attaching one of the toffee frames to the card base, and I'm attaching that with multimedia matte. Next, I'm going to take that striped background piece that was the inside of the frame that we die cut out, and I'm going to adhere that inside that toffee frame that I just added to the card base. Next, I'll adhere that second toffee frame right on top of that first toffee frame. And then finally, I'll add that rainbow striped frame on top of the toffee frames. And I'm going to need to make sure that the stripe design lines up with the stripes in the inset of the middle of the frame. I used the A2 thin frame cutting plate die to cut out a frame from Sugar Cube cardstock to add to my design. I chose 3 of the sentiment strips that I embossed in white with the mini strips rainbow stamp, and I'm adhering those to my card with foam sticky strips just to pop them up a little bit. The final touch is a few of the rainbow enamel dots scattered throughout the design. I made sure to add the dots onto different colors of cardstock so they would stand out. And now this card is done. I hope you enjoyed learning how I created this card and that you learned something new today. You can find all of the supplies that I used to create this card on the Tailored Expressions website at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.